So I am a professional geologist, and I've worked in geothermal for a really long time. And I also really enjoy going into hot springs. So it's nice that here I am at the end of the whole summer lecture series and talking about geothermal to keep you warm. This is Meadow Hot Springs, one of my favorites. You can, whenever I see that like blue water, I just want to jump right in. So here we go. Uh-oh, off to a good start.
Is it not working?
Hold on, I'll make it work. Okay, so this is an outline. I know some of you are scientists, but not all of you. So I'm trying to make it simple, but I'm going to talk about geothermal resources of Utah, how we produce renewable energy from geothermal power resources, kind of just the geology and distribution of Utah's geothermal resources. I'm going to talk a little bit about hot springs, not the whole time. And then I think we're going to pause because I've got a lot of slides, and so we'll talk about, if you've got questions about the technical part, we can go over that. And then after that, I've got like a rehashed presentation about ruined hot spring resorts of Utah with a bunch of then and now photos. It's more historic. So so let's see how far we get along this whole thing. So general classification of geothermal resources. I'm talking about the hydrothermal sources that are hot water. So that would be the high temperature steam and hot water above 350 degrees F or 180 degrees C. So those are used for direct steam and flash steam power generation. But basically, they've got to be hot enough to make steam and then drive turbines. And I'll show you some illustrations about that in a sec. And then moderate temperature are lower than 200 degrees F. And that's used for binary power generation and heating space. I'll talk a little bit about the binary power generation in a little bit too. And then low temperature, that's like direct use, used in greenhouses, aquaculture, and geothermal heat pumps, which you might be familiar with. I'll try this again. Okay. So the characteristics of a high temperature geothermal resource, where you have to have a heat source. Everybody always thinks it's all volcanoes, but it's not volcanoes.
Face the crowd.
It's not just all volcanoes. Anywhere on Earth, the deeper you go, the hotter it gets. So if you can get deep enough, you can always get heat. So either magmatic means hot, liquid, molten rock, basically. And non-magmatic would be other sources of heat, mostly deep circulation within the crust. So then you've got to have a way to move the hot water. So you need permeable faults or aquifers that contain the hot water. And then you need water, mostly, to transport the heat from the rocks to the surface. All right, so just a kind of a diagram here. Okay, so start out with cold water. This could be surface waters. It could be meteoric waters, rainfall, snowfall, that penetrate deep sediments usually and move along fractures, and then they encounter a natural heat source and basically get warmed up. When they get hot, they get buoyant, and then they come up along faults. And then in a natural geothermal system, you'd want to have a caprock to kind of keep that heat in, because if all the heat just came up, it would all cool to the atmosphere, and you wouldn't have a hot spring. You wouldn't have a hot area. Okay, and if you've got a power plant, this water feeds into the power plant, drives generators, and makes electricity. And then that same water, hot water, gets cooled, and then it's re-injected, and then it goes down again along faults and gets heated again, or it becomes buoyant again, and then it can be produced again. So that's what makes it a renewable energy resource. And so some mature geothermal fields have been in the Great Basin have been going for maybe 40 years or or so, and they use 90% of the water is recycled water like this. Okay, and just more details about the actual power plants. So here's a production well producing hot fluids. They come up. They can come up boiling. So then this is the steam separator. So the liquid phase goes this way, and the vapor phase goes this way. The phase expansion from water to gas drives these turbine blades and makes the electricity, and hopefully goes into a nearby transmission line. So then part of the steam is cooled, and it goes into the cooling tower, and then condenses, and then it can go back around and actually be heated again. Okay, what else? So then the water goes back into this injection well after it's condensed, and goes back down into the reservoir. So, or you could, there's other plants that use direct heat that use the water for, I don't know, aquaculture and pig farms and district heating, things like that. Okay, just besides being a renewable energy, also is low emissions. So it's generally about a tenth. Carbon dioxide emissions are about a tenth per megawatt of the carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuel power plants. Okay, here in the west, we have the red here is hot areas that are prospective for geothermal projects. So you can see Nevada's almost all red. So Nevada's like Saudi Arabia of geothermal energy. But see, a big part of Utah, the western part of Utah, is in the Great Basin and also has these great resources. And otherwise, this red area here, that would be the volcanoes, the Cascades that have heat associated with them. And you can also see there's not much geothermal resources in the eastern part of the country. So that's why we don't have a lot of clout in Congress and everything like that, because we just don't have too much support for it. Okay, so here are the hot parts of the country at about 3 kilometers, and that's about the limit now of where we can reach from conventional geothermal wells is about 10,000 feet or so. But if we could drill to 6 kilometers, almost the whole country would have enough energy to be capable of electrical generation. So it's just a technology problem of trying to get down to 6 kilometers, or we could provide enough energy for the whole country if we had the technology. Okay, so here we are back down in Utah. This is a map produced by the Utah Geological Survey. These pink areas and orange areas are known geothermal areas. So here we are in Wayne County here. So probably one of the older geothermal areas known to Utah is this Roosevelt Hot Springs, where the Brindell power plant is. But right now we've got 3 power plants that are geothermally use geothermal energy, and so that's 73 megawatts of power. And there's a lot more potential, right? And then direct use, much less use, but also lots of potential. So, okay, so we are here in Wayne County on the Colorado Plateau, and we've got thick crust. So it's hard for fluids to come up, and even though they're down there deep. But in the Basin and Range, it's undergoing extensional tectonics, so their faults are moving, normal faults are dropping the crust down, and it makes it easier for these large faults for magma and hot fluids to come up along those faults. And also, another thing people don't recognize too much is what the source of the geothermal fluids is. So a lot of the Basin and Range, including Salt Lake Basin, had big Pleistocene lakes that covered large areas, and that water has vertically infiltrated into the sediments that are in the basins now. So it's not new water, it's not meteoric water, it's old water. So that water has infiltrated into the basins and then become heated, and then they flow up along active faults, and that's where all the springs are. So here's our 3 geothermal power plants, one at Cove Fort, one at Blundell, and Thermo. The red dots, I don't know if you can see very well, those are hot springs. And another hot area, which I'm not going to talk about too much, is up in the Uinta Basin. There's some hot wells up there that, along with the oil and gas production, they bring up brine that is a resource that's not being used, is not being used at this time. Okay, so yeah, next. Okay, so here's just talking about the water itself. The geothermal water is really separated from the shallow groundwater systems. They're much deeper. They're down at 2 to 3 kilometers, and it's very old water. The age of the, older than the Pleistocene lake waters are, I don't know, Lake Bonneville was whatever, I can't remember now, 23,000 to 13 or 11,000 years old. So here's the extent of the original Lake Bonneville. The Great Salt Lake is a remnant of it now. These 2 arrows point to Milford. I tried to get these 2 maps to be about the same scale, so you can see that this whole Bonneville Lake Basin is basically the geothermal area here. And that's what the fluids are that are part of this system. So, and the hot springs are usually where the hot waters come up and mixed with meteoric waters or the groundwaters. That's where the hot springs are, on the edges of the basins, along the same faults. Okay, Utah's really actually very special. It's only one of 7 states that generates geothermal electricity. So, but still, it's only about 1% of Utah's total electrical generation. But there's lots of potential for more. It's just having the money to drill the wells and do all the work. But yeah. So there's a lot more resource available that could be exploited, I guess you could say. And so of the 3 states that produce the most power, first is California, then it's Nevada, and then Utah's third behind them. So it's very unusual to have that kind of a resource. So here's our 3 power plants. So about 1 megawatt of electricity supplies power for about 1,000 households. So altogether, what did I say, 72 megawatts would be enough for about 72,000 households. Okay, so here's a flyer put out by the state of Utah Department of Natural Resources. And I think they just put it out now. But just to show you examples of what kinds of geothermal systems we have in Utah. I just enlarged it in this next photo, next slide. So, okay, so these power plants called hydrothermal, right? Because we're using hot water, producing hot water, and that's making steam that drives the power plants and makes electricity. So the wells, blue is cool, so this is the injection well, and then red is the production well, and then it goes down into bedrock, 2 to 3 kilometers or so. And then so you're in a fractured kind of a bedrock situation. And then I haven't talked about enhanced geothermal systems yet, but this is where you don't have enough water to circulate the heat. So these are called enhanced or engineered geothermal systems. We're trying to go down and fracture the rock and then introduce a fluid to it, and then it would be normally heated up by the geothermal gradient, the hot rocks, and that water will come up and could be produced. So we've got this Utah Forge project we'll talk about in a little bit. So that's also in tight bedrock. And then a third kind of a system in Utah would be deep sedimentary basins, where you basically have like a sedimentary aquifer with lots of hot water in it and producing from that. So you had to drill deeper here because the isotherm's lower, deeper. This is from that same flyer, and they're just showing you some examples of these different kinds of resources. So this is Wilson Health Spring. I've never been there. It looks nice. This is that forage plant, that enhanced geothermal system, which is next to the Blundell hydrothermal plant. And then Thermal Hot Springs is another hydrothermal plant. And Newcastle Greenhouse is an example of direct use. Greenhouse, I think they're growing chrysanthemums and tomatoes, lots of other plants. And so that's all you can see in the Basin and Range province. We don't have those kinds of resources here in the Colorado Plateau or up in the middle Rocky Mountains. So here we are, Wayne County, here in Entrada. So you can see not very far, it's maybe 170 miles by road out to see these power plants. There's not too much to see. Mostly you recognize the cooling tower and the transmission lines that go through this whole area, which is very important as well. So these three power plants are all in Beaver County. And also in Beaver County, they're calling this the Utah's Renewable Energy Corridor, because there's also huge wind arrays and also solar arrays. Those are about 300 megawatts each, and they're also going expansion. So we've got 300 megawatts of solar, 300 megawatts of wind, and 72 megawatts of geothermal power in that same area. There's also pig farms where I think they are, and I'm not sure if this is whether they've actually developed not, but they're talking about gathering the methane off of that and using that as a biogas electrical generator. And there's a huge transmission line that goes to Southern California. So you've got a market and you've got a transmission line all in that same area. So the Blundells, I said that's the largest hydrothermal plant that we have. It used to be, Utah, Rocky Mountain Power and Pacific Core, and now it's Mid-American Energy. So this is quite a bit different than how it used to be. It used to be that the power producers also owned coal mines, and they still owe debt on those coal mines. So they just always want to produce coal. They don't want to produce geothermal. But now the regulatory issues have changed quite a bit. So like San Diego County is willing to pay more money to have a renewable resource instead of having a fossil fuel generated or fossil fuel plant. Okay, so it's pretty hot. 250 degrees C is about 500 degrees F, so really hot. So this would be considered a flash plant where the steam comes up and it flashes and changes phase and drives the turbines. And not so deep, up about 6,000 feet or so. Now, okay, I'm just showing this as a description to say what this would be like a volcanic magmatic geothermal system. We don't have any of these big volcanoes like we do in the Cascades, but we do have young volcanics, basaltic volcanics that are cooling still in the subsurface, and that provides heat for some of our power plants in hot springs. So this would be just the hot water, then it mixes with meteoric water and groundwaters and produces hot springs. Okay, so the area that has these younger volcanics is the Black Rock Desert. Here's Fillmore, Utah. And this whole area is basaltic, has basalt flows at the surface. And they're young. I don't know if you've driven down I-15. You can see Pavant Butte out there, big black butte. And it does have a cut from Lake Bonneville. So part of it was pre-Lake Bonneville. But there's also some really young flows there that are only 600 years old. But it's been studied a lot from people at the University of Utah. So there's quaternary faults. These are these red faults here. that provide permeability for the fluids. There's geophysical signatures for fluids up to 220 degrees C. And there's also a good cap over the top, these 2 kilometers of sediments over the basement that act like a thermal blanket over the reservoir. So there's no production here of any sort. It's just very prospective. And then here's this forge area it's a big Department of Energy sponsored project. So they've committed $220 million into this project. The idea is if they can prove that they can make an engineered geothermal system, inject the fluid, make fractures, and have it produce, then if they can do it here, they can do it anywhere in the world, basically. So it would still be a renewable energy resource if they can figure out how to do it. And then we also need to how we've got these low temperature resources. I was going to talk a little bit about the prison. I don't know too much about it. You know, the prison draper is all heated with geothermal water. So they've got an exchange system, just hot water up against cold, and it circulates and it heats the whole. It did heat all the men's prison and the women's prison. And before that, it cascaded uses. So it went from the prison. And then it went down to some greenhouses, Utah roses, the old Utah roses, and then it went down to pig farms that would down just to, I don't know, heat up the mud farm or whatever. And so, but there's also greenhouses and fish raising, dive pools and spas that are kind of direct use kind of thing. So here's Bonneville Sea Base out in Tooele. So that's an aquaculture. They've got all kinds of tropical fish and I think a couple alligators, and you can dive here. It's deep. The other places you can dive up at Midway Hot Pots up there, and you can dive at Blue Lake, which is maybe across the border into Nevada, but yeah, scuba in the middle of the winter. And Newcastle, that's down near Cedar City, big greenhouses. And so this is a really shallow, it's only less than 100 meters depth, and it's already 108 degrees C, so that's 200 degrees F or so. And it's what they mean by a blind resource is there was no indication that it was hot down there. There wasn't any hot springs or anything like that, no fumaroles, no nothing, except then just a farmer was drilling an irrigation well and hit this hot water. So this is where you need to use geophysics to try to find these areas that you can't directly see with your eyeballs. Okay, so I know I was supposed to be talking about hot springs the whole time, but anyway, I've been to a lot of them. I hope you've been to some of them. Some of them are not really that great. I mean, some of them you get out there and they're just like this kind of a stinky, muddy place in the swamp that took hard to get to and stuff like that. So, yeah. So, yeah, you must have your own favorites. We can talk about that later. So here's one of mine, Meadow Hot Springs near Fillmore. Now this one, it's privately owned, but the guys built a nice gravel road out there and gravel pads to park on and fencing to keep the cows out. And it's really, really lovely. And it can get crowded because it's so nice, but it's great.
How hot is the water?
I don't know. I think I have something about this. It's about 100, I think.
Yeah.
C or F. People enjoying the hot springs. Whoop. Okay, so here, closer to us, near Monroe, is it's called the Monroe geothermal area, and it's got Monroe Hot Springs area. So this is right adjacent to a commercial resort, and so this is Red Hill. And here's our suburban down at the bottom, but this whole huge travertine mound has been built up by the hot spring waters over time. There's some abandoned greenhouses here, and then there's the town of Monroe down there. And it's along the severe fault here, normal fault.
So this isn't Mystic Hot Springs?
It's right next to it, like a mile. So if you go a mile north, you get to Mystic Hot Springs. Here's Steve. Yeah, but then lurch. Anyway, but you can see the hot water coming down, and then also all this, snow. So you can, even in a geothermal area, you can have hot springs come up and then cold springs right next to them. And there's a happy, happy guy. He's almost as red as the rock around him. Here's another happy gal. It's Emily, our daughter. This is at Mystic Hot Springs. Also travertine, that red travertine. And there they have like one big pool, and they have a bunch of bathtubs. And Will's been there with us. Okay, so here's the part where I was going to just stop and ask you if you have any questions about the technical part. And does anybody have any questions? No. Oh, Eric's coming. Okay.
Just following instructions to
Yes,
come up
yes.
to the mic. Great talk, thanks. What are the technical challenges to drilling deeper than 3 kilometers? Because it seems like if you could get lower, that's a huge resource. What's the stumbling block?
Because
in-
it's just super, super expensive, and it has to be a big borehole to bring the hot water up. So they're talking about all kinds of new, like sonic drilling, spallation type of things. Instead of just drilling and grinding away with a diamond pit, they're talking about all these different ways to drill. So it's mostly expense. And sometimes there's corrosive fluids and stuff too, but the big problem is just expense. Yeah.
Can I just follow on
Oh, and
expense?
then a lot of the metal things, it gets too hot, they melt and corrode and stuff.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
It seems like once you have this well system, that the geothermal, I mean, I don't know what the economics are, but it seems like it'd be a no-brainer to run over time because you're not
Right.
using any other resource to provide that hot energy. At what point, and maybe you don't know this, but at what point when you actually build one of these does it become economically break even? Once you have the
8 to
wells
10
in-
years or something like that. 8
Oh,
to
well,
12
we should
years.
be building these all over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Sue. Very
Yeah.
interesting. You mentioned the power lines that go out. And does most of the energy produced here in Utah then leave Utah, or are we using it here?
Well,
in-
we're only using 1% of it or
Oh,
something.
that was the 1%?
Or, but no,
Okay.
1% of the geothermal, of the power is geothermal.
Is
But the rest of
geothermal?
it, most of it goes to California.
It
so
does.
Yeah, because they're willing to pay a higher price for it.
Okay.
So it depends on the local utilities.
Interesting. And the other thing is, how does that impact aquifers that are used by farmers or
Yeah, so
how does that all
it-
relate? Steeper?
yeah, it's much deeper and it's older, right? So the aquifers that farmers use, that's modern meteoric water that goes into the mountains and comes down and goes into the basin. But these are old waters, and they're separated by 4,000 feet of rock in between. So they mix the waters mix when they get shallower along the faults, but generally you can kind of think of them as a completely separate system. And another interesting thing about water in Utah is it's treated like a water resource. So it's all the leases and everything are done as water. But in Nevada, that hot geothermal water is considered like a mineral resource. And so it can be exploited without, yeah.
Good.
Yeah,
great.
so
Thank you.
Yep.
So I thought at one point you said something about in some instances you may have to introduce some other fluids to
Yeah.
help the hot. What are those fluids? Are they inert stuff? Or
Yeah,
are
those would be just freshwater wells, cold wells that are nearby. So, yeah, makeup wells they call them. Yeah, and that would be using some of the water that's meteoric or yeah.
not some other substance?
No. It's still water. Yeah.
We have a question from one of our many Facebook
Okay.
listeners. Is there a risk of depleting the heat when used for energy production?
Well, the idea is that the rocks have infinite amount of heat. So as long as you can get the water to them and they get warmed up, yeah, they won't, it won't, you can't cool the reservoir. You could bypass where the rocks are hot, you know, if the rocks were injected and then they suddenly just came straight up along a fault or something, they didn't have a chance to get heated, you could flood out a well with cold water, but it's all the engineering, and or they might pick a different, sometimes they even convert production wells to injection wells because they're correctly spaced, so they'll end up going towards the production well.
And I have a question, a separate question.
I don't know if I answered.
You mentioned that there might be potential for using geophysical surveys to detect otherwise undetectable sources. So are there any cases where they've used, say, high-definition seismic surveys?
They use a lot of electrical magnetic studies, so they do resistivity, tells you where things are flowing. That's a very common especially looking for shallow things, just as a easy exploration tool is resistivity mapping. Yeah, and then magnetic tellurics. Yeah. So seismic would tell you difference in density, and you would like to know where fluids are moving. So you need to look at the magnetic tellurics. Yeah.
So in terms of the ratio of like how much it costs to set up a geo plant
Mhm.
versus how much power it makes, how does that compare to solar or nuclear and other sources of
Ugh.
energy?
It's going to be way more expensive.
Yeah.
The initial cost is very expensive. Like to drill one well is between $5 and $25 million, and then you don't know if it's going to be productive or not.
Till you get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but then it does last, 40 years or
Right.
whatever. So,
And does some of that have to do with the fact that it's not as common and there's not as many of these, being built and the technology isn't as mature, or?
yeah, that is true. So that's why the enhanced geothermal system concept is so appealing, is because you could do it everywhere. But right now, where we have the power plants is where the resource is closest to the surface. So, yeah.
And that enhanced that's the force, the
Yes,
government
that's
funded.
when you make artificial fractures and introduce waters to that rock that's already hot. Yeah. So you could do that all the way, back east or whatever.
And is that because that goes deeper, or because
Yeah,
that
yeah,
fault
it would have to go
fracture all
deeper.
the way down to
Yeah.
that 6 kilometer mark where you could get it?
or even deeper, yeah,
very
because
deep? Okay.
those have thick crusts, so yeah, the heat flows lower.
I guess to follow up, what have the results been so far of that?
Oh, well, they're drilling. They're going to drill the injection well. No, the production well. No, the injection well. They drilled the production well, and they did first course of fracturing. So that was successful. And they use microseismic stuff to watch where the fractures are being built. So they know they've got a good cloud of permeable fractures all around the well bore. And next, they're going to drill the injection well, and then inject fluids and hope that they meet and then can be produced. And that's going to happen, I think, in February, something this next year.
This might be a dumb question, but are there any potential downsides to creating fractures in the
Oh
rock
yeah,
in
there
the
is.
ground? I'm
You can
curious
make
what that would
earthquakes. You can make earthquakes. Yeah.
be. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm wondering.
Yeah. So no, they do a whole bunch of modeling to see, and they try to inject it slowly. Just what they call hydro-shearing, just to barely open up the fractures that are already existing. It's not like in an oil and gas well, you're making new fractures in rocks, but in most of the basement rocks and geothermal places, you're just opening up pre-existing planes of weakness, like pre-existing fractures. They're just opening them up gently. But there has been instances where they've made pretty good sized earthquakes that freaked everybody out, like Switzerland and Germany. They've had a couple of EGS projects that have caused earthquakes, and it was bad. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right, so the next part is just looking at, this is a presentation I made in 2004. It's just then and now, ruined hot springs resorts of Utah, and you can look for it online if you want. So I looked at 3 areas. These are places where there is no longer resorts active right now. So there's the Wasatch Warm Springs Fault, Beck's Hot Springs, Wasatch Springs. If you're from Salt Lake, you're familiar with this area. So now it was a really big deal when the pioneers first came to Salt Lake. It was a place to bathe, and they had big communal bathhouses, and you could do your laundry there, and I don't know, so this was a bathhouse and saloon, 1850. And you can see the Wasatch Mountains in the background. Kind of when you do these then and nows, you look at the profile here to try to match it up. Okay, and then there was the Utah Railway. This is like was developed way back to try to bring visitors from Salt Lake out of town north towards Ogden, and they would just stop at all the little cold springs and hot springs all along the way. And it would be like a daily excursion, through Lagoon and up to Ogden, mouth of mountain of Ogden Canyon. There's hot springs there, and it was considered tourism. So here's Beck's Hot Springs Resort. I think it burned down too eventually, but so again, look at this profile here of the Oakers there, and you can see railroad this way, and road coming through here, and then this was the resort. It says Beck's Hot Springs. I don't know if you can read that, but and this was a big hot spring lake that no longer exists there. The whole thing was warm, big wetlands area. Wow. Try this. Oop. Okay, so here's that same spot today. I tried to recreate the same profile here. The railroad still goes in the same place. This is I-15. This is the overpass for 215, I think. And if you've driven under here to go to Beck Street, you can kind of once in a while get a little whiff of that sulfur smell, and that's all that's left of that huge hot spring resort and area. And they had horse racing, and it was like, I don't know, they had a lot of things going on. And then there was the Warm Springs Plunge building. Lots of people learned how to swim there the old days. Yeah, so and then it was the Children's Museum for a while. And the hot water warmed the whole building still even back then. And then the pool, of course, was shut down by then. It mostly closed because it was too expensive to keep it going. And because of the sanitation rules by the state of Utah. So yeah, there was the plunge. I think plunge means you can dive into it. That's what I finally figured out. Yeah, so that's 1940. Here's the outside building of the building. Snowy days back then. Oh, sorry. Oops, wrong way. Just kidding. Oh, that was the right way. Okay. So this is what the Children's Museum did with the pool. They filled it up with stuff. Did I go the wrong way? No. There we go. Okay, so here's the Warm Springs area today. It just flows. The water flows out, and nobody's using it for anything. It's a big wetlands area with a lot of birds, and but there's a refinery in the background. All this scrap metal. So that's Hot Spring Street. Anyway, I think it's really a shame. Okay, so now this is the second area I looked at was Castilla Hot Springs. This is along Route 6, going up to Price, right from Spanish Fork Canyon. And so it was a big resort, had a big hotel here and pools, and people used to take the railroad all the way up from the mining area. Steve, help me out.
Eureka.
Yeah, Eureka, that whole area. And they'd come up for the day and go dancing and hang out, stay in the hotel and have dinner and swim, and they go back for the day. So that was a big excursion. now. And, so here's this big sandstone hotel. It's made from local sandstone right there. And then here's what it looked like in 1978. The hotel burned down, and they built the road, and the railroad expanded, and so it was just a pond where all the locals used to go and party, and it turned into a problem area, and eventually the local authorities blew it up. And so now there's nothing left of it either. Here's what's left, just this one little pool, and then there's like a rock that has got some salt underneath it. And yeah, the water is still there somewhere. It just goes under the ground someplace. So, and actually all of that Spanish Fork Canyon, there used to be a bunch of cold springs along when you're driving it, especially on the north side of the road. There'd be all these cold springs, cattails and everything. All that's now been put into a water system for Spanish Fork. So, okay, and the third one I looked at was the Verkin Sanitarium and Resort Company. This is Pah Tempe, down near Hurricane Verkin. Historical photos there. Locals used it for baptisms, and they treated their sheep for not scurvy. What do you call it? Scabies. Scabies. Yeah, they used to the sulfurous water was good for scabies. So yeah. Not at the same time. They didn't do those things. Yeah. The pool. Here's so this was 2002. Here's Emily going, "Where's the water?" So yes, that used to be the pool, and then they had a bunch of grottos. Show you that. Yeah, this was in the heyday, kind of all grottos filled, and then this is the Virgin River down here. We spent many fun times there. We'd drive down from Bryan Head, drive back up to Bryan Head with hair frozen with sulfur water, and smelled like that for days and days. Sorry, trying to aim. Okay, so that's with the pool's empty and everything. Same thing, the water's still there. The Washington County Water Conservancy District wanted to get water from the Virgin River before it encountered the hot spring area, because the hot springs are really, really saline, so they're very poor quality, and it was the highest salinity in the whole Colorado River system, so they figured they wanted to try to get the water from above there. But anyway, by doing that, they drilled into like the main conduit where the water used to come up. And so that just ended up distributing the water. It's still there, but it just comes up in a whole bunch of different places in the river, the same volume. Okay, then here's this desalination plant the USGS put in here to try to get rid of the salts. And it operated for a little while. It's a pilot project, and I'm not sure what happened to it after that. Okay, so just, here was the original resort owner, Ken Anderson, who's kind of a character, but, he said this is healing mineral water, and 20,000 people enjoyed the hot springs there, Pah Tempe, and from around the world people came, and the diversion of the river water was decreasing the water quality, is what he said. And then you had the Washington County Water Conservancy District saying it was poison water, it was bringing too much salts into the Virgin and Colorado rivers. And, we had to have that water pipeline critical to the growing population. So same story now, still water wars, but okay, but the update is that the Verkin City has announced that Iron Mountain Hot Springs Resort of Glenwood, Colorado is going to reopen the resort, and it's going to be open for public. It's not going to be one of these fancy places that cost $350 to get in just for the day, kind of thing. And so, and it's going to be called Zion Canyon Hot Springs. So I hope it really does, they're committed to having it for the community. and not just a fancy spa. And I think that's it. I think. Oh, it was the wrong way. Just kidding. Okay, yeah. So, ruined hot spring resorts of Utah. They didn't need the hot water anymore for washing, or bathing, or baptisms. Especially Beck Hot Springs. That's just a really narrow transportation corridor there between the Wasatch Mountains and the Great Salt Lake. So it just was too crowded in there to keep a big resort open like that. And then the chlorination of public pools by the health department was a big deal for the warm springs. That's a lot of throughput of water, right, to try to to try to chlorinate. There was multiple fires, and yeah, so yeah, I don't know. So I think that's all I've got. So anyway, the resource remains. I mean, there's still geothermal waters at these places, those 3 places in particular, and the natural environment's kind of ruined, but it'd be nice if they would still use the resource for something instead of just letting it spill out on the ground. So that's what I've got. I brought a bunch. These are acknowledgments and people's figures that I stole from them for the slides. So.